The Talmud quotes a rule. I'm going to speak about prayer today before we begin the history series. But I just wanted to give, since this is the month of Elul and we're approaching the High Holy Days, I wanted to talk about prayer today, which may not be the topic that you prayed for, but the Talmud mentions that there is a rule in Jewish life that 30 days before a holiday, the rabbis begin to discuss the rules regarding the holiday. The origin of that is regarding the holiday of Pesach. So it says in the Talmud, Shloshim Yom Kodim Pesach, 30 days before Pesach, we begin to discuss the laws of Pesach. That's based upon verses in the Torah that indicate that Moshe did so. Then the Talmud extrapolates from Pesach, and it includes Shavuot, and it includes Sukkot as well. Because it says in the Torah, Vayedaber Moshe es Moadei Hashem el Bnei Yisrael, Moshe spoke regarding the holidays of Israel to the Jewish people. So what does it mean he spoke about the holidays? We've already, in the Torah, listed all the holidays, and we've listed all the commandments that are involved. And the rule in the Torah is that there are no extraneous words. The Torah does not repeat itself, so to speak, merely out of poetic license or because the scribe made a mistake, but that every word in the Torah is to be examined, and that basically is what the entire subject of the Talmud is about, is how to look at every word in the Torah. So why does the Torah say that Moshe spoke about the holidays? So the interpretation that the rabbis gave to it is this idea that 30 days before the holidays, before Sukkot and before Shavuot, just like 30 days before Pesach, Moshe discussed with the Jewish people the special laws and traditions that govern the holiday, and that therefore that was the topic for the month before the holiday. So the question arises, the obvious question, if this is Rosh Chodesh Elul, why don't we discuss, why is there no mention that 30 days before Rosh Hashanah or 30 days before Yom Kippur, we should discuss the laws, we should discuss the traditions, everything that's involved. There is no special understanding that we're supposed to do so. So what's the difference between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and between Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot? So the answer that's given is that Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, the main mitzvah of each holiday, is particular to that holiday, and it does not extend to the rest of the year. For instance, to eat matzah, so to eat matzah is on the Seder night, but if you eat matzah, tonight, so it's just crackers. There's no mitzvah. You pick up a lulav and esrog today, no mitzvah. It's particular to the day. And therefore, that's why it was discussed 30 days before. The main commandment, the main theme of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is self-improvement. It is repentance, it's self-analysis. It's being able to rise above our weaknesses, to strengthen ourselves, to become better people. That mitzvah is all year round. It's 24 hours, it's 7/24. All the time. And therefore, there is no particular commandment that you should do so 30 days before Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, because you should do it 30 days before any day. We're always doing it, so to speak. And our nature, our behavior patterns, our attitudes, it's like a business. when I was a lawyer, I had many clients, but the common denominator in all business clients was that if the business wasn't going up, it was going down. Business never is stable. It's going in one direction or another. And the same thing is true of human behavior. Human beings, we are not stable. We either become better or we become worse, we become stronger, we become weaker, we become more susceptible to good or to bad, or less susceptible. But we're not the same. We're not on a plateau forever. And because of that, therefore, we're always engaged in this idea of trying to improve ourselves. One of the methods that the Jewish people have always used as a vehicle for self-improvement is prayer, tefillah, the ability to pray. Now, in the ancient world, where service of the deities entailed sacrifices, entailed in paganism statues and forms and gods. So prayer was a difficult and abstract idea. It was not something that was easily understood, especially prayer to an unseen God, because that requires a degree of sophistication that is not always present. It's much easier to bow down in front of a statue of Buddha, or to somehow imagine a corporeal form, than to pray to something that is beyond us, abstract, really be infinite, and we are finite. So to a certain extent, the concept of prayer is a Jewish invention, as many of the other things that exist in the world really have Jewish origins. And the concept of tefillah, the rabbis say, is avoda shebalev. It's the work of the heart. There are mitzvot, there are commandments that we do with our mouth. There are commandments we do with our hands. There's commandments we do with our feet. There are physical things that we do or that we don't do. But the inner part of the man, the lave, the heart, so that's given to prayer. Prayer is called avoda shebalev, the service of the heart. Now, the heart is a very wondrous instrument. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi says in one of his famous poems, he compares the Jewish people to a heart. Yisrael Lev Shebumos, he said, the Jewish people are the heart amongst all the nations. It's the strongest of all organs, but it's the most susceptible and fatal of all organs. Because God forbid if our heart fails, so then we're out of business. Nevertheless, our heart has within it the ability to pump. It's a muscle that pumps constantly, millions of times during our lifetime. The Lord should grant all of us long and good and healthy lives. So it's 70 times a minute, and there's 60 minutes in an hour, and 24 hours in the day, and 365 days in the year. And if we live, 75, 80, 90, 95, that's a lot of pumps. I remember my father-in-law, blessed memory, who lived to his late 90s, was taken for a cardiac examination, and the doctor that was in charge of him put him through a sonogram, which is really like a computer X-ray of the heart, and you can see the heart pumping, the valves and everything, and they can tell what condition the heart is in. And the doctor said to my father-in-law, he said, Rabbi Levine, he said, what a wonderful machine we have here. Look at the screen. Look at the monitor. You can see everything. What a machine. My father-in-law said, what a machine. What about the heart? Well, then that's a pretty good machine. We're impressed by the fact that we can see it. But the heart itself, what a machine that is. And so therefore the heart is the most vital of all organs. And it's the most susceptible of all organs. So when the rabbis called prayer avodah shebelev, the service of the heart, they gave it those qualities, that it's the most susceptible of all service, meaning that it can be nothing more than a charade, if that, or it is the most exalted of all services, of all methods of worshiping God, because what lies within my heart, my soul, within me, that's truly me. On the outside, we can put on clothing, we can put on airs, but on the inside, we have to have an honest assessment of ourselves. So, yes?
Where's the source of I know, it's in the Torah, but where's the source of the connection between the heart, this instrument that pumps blood, and this thing we call the heart, meaning the inner feelings, or
the connection is simple between the heart and our inner feelings is because again, the same idea, because if the heart fails, there are no inner feelings. Well, and if the heart fails, then the brain is going too, right? The brain can't operate without blood, without oxygen going to the brain constantly. So that's the connection. The connection is because of the fact that it is the organ of life. And therefore, it represents our life. It represents living. And so that's what is within us. So in prayer, in the laws of prayer, we have a concept called kavona. Kavona means intent, concentration, the ability to focus. And since we have relatively long prayer services in the morning, 40 minutes, an hour, and the other times 15 minutes, etc., it's hard to concentrate for an hour on end. Most people's span of concentration is measured in minutes, if that. That's why rabbi sermons are so short. Hopefully. It's hard to concentrate for a long period of time. They say that the great Rebbe of Kotsk, Menachem Mendel Morgenstern, was once was a genius and a holy man and a very different person. He was once asked by a Polish nobleman that he said, "The Jews say you're a special person. What makes you so special?" So he answered him, he said, "I can concentrate for 2 to 3 hours on end." Concentrate on one subject for 2 to 3 hours on end, which is a feat. When most of us pray, I shouldn't include you, but I can speak for myself. There's an old Jewish joke that when a Jew finishes praying, you can give him Shalom Aleichem, you can welcome him because he's been around the world twice. And, because the mind runs, our mind is always running. A million thoughts always fall in. So to be able to concentrate, that is a great accomplishment. So we have a dispute in the Talmud whether mitzvos tzrichot kavona or mitzvos ein tzrichot kavona. If when you do a mitzvah, do you need intent or just you did it, even if your mind was a million miles away? And it seems from the Talmud that we hold that you don't need intent. The Talmud says if you're, for instance, if on Sukkot you pick up a lulav and esrog in your hand because you want to move it somewhere, and move it to the next table, so then you fulfilled the mitzvah. If absent-mindedly you ate matzah on the night of Pesach, so you ate matzah and fulfilled the mitzvah. But all agree, Rabbeinu Yonah says this in Rabbeinu Yonah of Gerona, 13th century Gerona. He says that even if we are of the opinion that mitzvot do not require intent, but everybody agrees that prayer requires kavanah, requires intent, concentration. And therefore, I want to speak to you about what's the definition of concentration, when, where, and how, and especially how does it apply to us, because we find it difficult to focus for long periods of time. And therefore, to a certain extent, one can become frustrated with one's own prayer. And that was not God's intention. The prayer is not meant as a torture session. So we find in the Rambam, in his code, in the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam says as follows, that we're talking here especially about the prayer of the Amidah, of the 18, 19 brachot that we recite, the Shmona Esrei. That's what the Rambam speaks about tefillah, that's what he's talking about. Because the two essential parts of the tefillah are the reading of the Shema and the service of the 18, 19 brachot, the Amidah. So the Rambam says that if someone prays without intent, without concentration, bli kavanah, so the Rambam says the prayer is not acceptable. That's not prayer. It's like you didn't pray. The Rambam says you have to pray again. And the Rambam says, Elu dvorim shemakvinas atfila. These are things that prevent tefillah from being done correctly. And he lists one of them is the fact that there's no kavonas alev. There's no, the heart isn't there. I was a lawyer. I had a sign on my desk that said, do not open mouth unless brain is in gear. So the same thing here is unless the heart is in gear, or unless some thought is involved. Yet the Rambam himself says in a later halacha that if a person had kavanah in the first blessing of the Shmona Esrei, in other words, the birchat avot, the bracha of our father regarding our fathers. So Elokei Avraham, Elokei Yitzchak, Elokei Yaakov, that blessing and the blessing that ends Baruch Atah Hashem Mogein Avraham, the first blessing of the Shmona Esrei. If one had intent, if one concentrated and had intent on that bracha, so even though if he did not have such intent on the other 17, 18 brachot that are going to follow, nevertheless he doesn't have to repeat the prayer service. So everybody that looks at it says it looks like the Rambam contradicts himself. On one hand, he says that if there's no intent and no kavanah, the prayer is nothing, and one should have to repeat it. In the other place, he says that if one had kavanah on the first blessing, so then that, so to speak, will carry you through, and even if you didn't have kavanah on the other blessings, that's all right, it'll work. So on this apparent contradiction in the Rambam, there is a very famous idea on prayer that is advanced by Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, Reb Chaim Brisker, the famous Rosh Yeshiva of Volozhin, the inventor, the creator of a new analytical method of how to study Talmud and how to study the Rambam. A method which over the last 150 years has become the method in most of the yeshivot in the world. And that is basically an analysis. You pick the thing apart, and you see that it's composed of many different ideas. And then once you realize that it has different components, then you're able to resolve contradictions because we're not talking about the same thing anymore. So Reb Chaim says that the word kavanah, the intent, in the Rambam covers two diverse subjects. The Rambam uses one word to cover both, but it's really two different things. One definition of kavanah is to know what you are saying, to understand the words. It shouldn't be just gibberish. Perush hamilim, what do the words mean? So that is called kavanah, intent, because I know what I'm saying. Because if you say things that you don't know what you mean, you certainly can't intend anything. First definition is to be able to know exactly what you're saying. The second definition of kavanah is not only what you're saying, but to whom are you saying it? It's a sense of the transcendental immanence of God, the presence of God. Da lifnei mi ata omed. Know who you're standing before. That when we pray, we're always in the presence of God, but when we pray, it's like we're speaking to God directly. So everything that we say is in front of Him. Now those are two different concepts of kavanah. So Reb Chaim says as follows. Reb Chaim says this latter sense of kavanah, of having a positive knowledge of the fact that an awareness of God, that we're standing in front of God, that's required throughout Shemona Esrei. That's required in all the brachot. And that's what the Rambam means, that if there is no kavanah, there will not be any prayer. Because if there is no awareness of whom we're praying to, there's no awareness of God, then it really is just words gibberish. The other concept of kavanah, of knowing what the words mean, of understanding and appreciating every word that one says, that is limited to the first bracha in the Shemona Esrei. Naturally, we want you to know every bracha. We want you to know every word that you're praying. But the minimum requirement for prayer is that prayer of the first bracha in Shemona Esrei, that one has knowledge of what that means. And why is the first bracha so special? Because God's name is mentioned so many times in the first prayer. Baruch Ato Hashem, Elokeinu, our God, Elokei Avoseinu, the God of our fathers, Elokei Avraham, the God of Avraham, the God of Yitzchak, the God of Yaakov, Hakeil Agodol, the great God, etc., etc. So God's name is mentioned so many times, it's mentioned more times than in any other blessing that appears in the Shemona Esrei, and therefore it has this priority, it has this importance that grants it a special quality that it requires kavanah, that you understand what you're saying. Not only that you're aware that you're standing in front of God, but that you understand what you're saying. So we see those are two different types of kavanah, completely different. It is possible for someone to have an awareness of God and not know one word that he's saying. The famous Hasidic story about the shepherd boy that came to the synagogue on Yom Kippur, and he was illiterate, and he saw everyone praying with great devotion, and he felt overcome by the moment, and he also wanted to pray, but he was completely illiterate. He didn't know how to say any of the words, so he whistled. And when he whistled, everybody turned around startled. He said, that's chutzpah to whistle in the synagogue in the middle of the prayer service. And his companion, the Baal Shem Tov, allegedly said, I want you to know, he said, that whistle went straight up to heaven. But that's not prayer. That's still a whistle. Prayer requires a knowledge of the words, at least of the words of the first bracha, of the Shmoneh Esrei. So that is the opinion of Reb Chaim. And because of that, therefore, he posits that according to the Rambam, you need a positive awareness of God at all times during prayer. That positive awareness, that kavona, is necessary at all times. Otherwise, one doesn't fulfill one's obligation. The Chazon Ish, however, lowered the bar for us. We'll see that this is one of the cases where the rabbis, so to speak, made the situation fit the reality of human beings. If one raises the bar of piety so high that human beings cannot reach it, then to a certain extent it becomes useless. The Torah speaks to human beings, it doesn't speak to supermen. And human beings find it difficult. So here we find that the rabbis, as I mentioned, lowered the bar for us. So the Chazon Ish says that one need not have a positive awareness of God throughout the entire prayer service. He said just participating in the prayer service indicates that you have some sort of awareness, otherwise you wouldn't be there. And that, so to speak, is sufficient. It's not optimum, but it's sufficient. We'll see that in the Shulchan Aruch, so the Rambam is written in the 12th century, 13th century, I'm sorry. The Mishnah Torah is written in the 13th century. The Rambam was born in 1135, he dies in 1204. The Mishnah Torah between 12th and 13th century. 200 years later, almost 300 years later, Jews are expelled from Spain. When the Jews are expelled from Spain, a large contingent of great rabbis came to the land of Israel. And in fact, they wanted even to renew the Sanhedrin at that time. And the great Rabbi Yaakov Beirav, called a convention of people to try and renew the Sanhedrin. The attempt failed because of the fact there was no unanimity on the matter. But great rabbis came here. Amongst one of the greatest who came here was Rabbi Yosef Karo, who later became the author of the Shulchan Aruch that we have, of the Code of Jewish Law. And he says in the Code of Jewish Law, he says that one needs kavona, and if one doesn't have kavona, one should try and pray again. But he says, if you prayed the first bracha, so then that's sufficient. The Ramah, Rabbi Yosef Karo was a Sephardi. The Ramah, Rabbi Moshe Isserlich, was the Ashkenazi counterpart, and he wrote glosses, he wrote notes into the Shulchan Aruch to make it conform to Ashkenazic custom and practice. So the Ramah said already it's useless to tell him to pray again because why will he have more concentration the second time than he had the first time? So the Ramah is already dealing with the reality of people. It's unlikely that he's going to be able to concentrate any better. It's unlikely that any of this is going to improve him. So a person should therefore attempt to say the first bracha of the Shmoneh Esrei with all kavona possible, and then he'll pray the rest of the service, and we hope that he'll do his best. But we cannot say that he should repeat simply because of the fact that he did not have kavona for all 18, 19 brachas. The Mishnah Brura, the Chafetz Chaim in the 19th century, the end of the 19th century. So he raises an interesting question. He said, what if a person is praying and you said the first bracha and you realize that you had no intent whatsoever when you said it. You had no concentration, you just said the words, right? And your mind was a million miles away, and now you're snapped back to the fact that you're praying. So how can you continue praying the other 18 blessings when it's obvious that since you didn't have kavona for the first blessing, that it's not going to be acceptable. So he therefore says an idea that one should stand in one's place and wait until the Chazan, until the Shliach Tzibur repeats the blessings, right? He repeats the Shemona Esrei. When he repeats it, we should have in mind, the person rather, should have in mind the kavona for the words that the Chazan says, and therefore that will discharge his obligation. The question then arises, what if the Chazan never had kavona? So that's an interesting point, that we don't have to rely on the Chazan having kavona. I can supply the kavona, he only has to supply the words. My kavona can invest his words.
What about a Mariv when there's no repetition?
Oh, so Mariv is a reshus. That's why they don't repeat it, because it's not, we have taken it upon ourselves as a custom, but it is not obligatory, whereas the mincha and shacharis are obligatory. Now,
when the shots that he has kavanah to motzi the tzibur, or to go be yotzei in the field, or to go.
He needs all kavanas. He needs kavanah that he represents the community. He needs kavanah for the words. He has to say the words correctly. Yeah, all of that is part of the package. That's why who leads us in the services is an important thing. Now, this idea of kavona, therefore, is basic to our understanding of prayer. That at least we know what we say. Today it's much easier because there are excellent sidurim, excellent prayer books with translations. And it's really possible to know every word that we say. And also that we have an awareness of the fact that we are in the presence of God. Now I want to discuss one more issue here in prayer. When we pray for something, by what magic, so to speak, how does that influence, so to speak, God to change his mind, so to speak? Person is, God forbid, ill, or he's unemployed, or he has problems. He wants the Chicago Cubs to win. He prays for it. He prays sincerely with all of his heart and all of his might. And he understands what he is saying. He understands all the words and the blessing for health. And he has a true understanding that he's standing before God. But how does that influence God? What does God care what he says? Under what category can we put such sort of prayer? Because there's an element of prayer which is praise of God. Okay, so that I can understand, praise of God. God is great. But when I ask for personal things, as for instance in the Shemona Esrei, we do ask for personal things. Personal, national. Why does that, how does that work? So there's an idea that's expressed by Rabbi Yosef Albo. Rabbi Yosef Albo was a Spanish Jew, lived in the 1400s. He wrote a book of Jewish values and philosophy called the Book of Ikorim, Sefer HaIkorim, the Book of Principles. He was a Renaissance man, knew everything, and his philosophy differs quite a bit from that of the Rambam. He was not Aristotelian. It's a whole different view of the matter. And he was one of the rabbis. The church, the Inquisition, forced the Jews into a public debate in Tortosa in the 1440s as to the relative merits of Christianity and Judaism. And they forced 300 rabbis, they gathered them from Spain and Portugal, and they forced them to participate in the debate. Rabbi Yosef Halbo was the leader of the Jewish contingent. The pressure upon the rabbis was so great that a number of the rabbis actually converted to Christianity in the middle of the debate. So we look back at it and we say, well, how could such a thing have happened? But we weren't there, and we weren't subject to the pressures, and we didn't understand the climate at the time. Just as our grandchildren and great-grandchildren will look back at us and say, how did they do things that were so foolish, etc., etc. So hindsight grants you a vision that's not present when you're in the situation. In any event, he was one of the leading participants, one of the leaders of the Jewish side, so to speak. And he discusses this problem of prayer. How does prayer influence God? And he says an interesting, almost a radical idea. He says it doesn't influence God at all. It influences the person who's praying. It changes the person who is praying. If one prays to God sincerely, then one elevates one's spiritual self by a millimeter, by whatever, but some change occurs. And we have a rule in Jewish life. For instance, if a person is, God forbid, very ill, critically ill, so there's a mechanism in Jewish life to change that person's name. So if his name was, let's say, Yosef, the son of Yaakov, now they'll change his name to Raphael Yosef, the son of Yaakov. And we say in the ceremony that on Yosef ben Yaakov the decree fell, but on Raphael Yosef ben Yaakov there is no decree. And therefore he could be healed. If you want the example of that, last week I suffered having the so big virus destroying my computer. I got 600 to 800 emails in about 5 hours. All repeats, and all sorts of terrible emails. So after paying $65 to my computer expert to come and tell me that there's nothing he can do, so I called up my server and I said to them, I'm changing my email address. Instead of RB Wine, I'm RB Wine 1. It took 4 hours to do it, and that's it. And, so RB Wine is still getting emails, from all over the world, right? But RB Wine 1 is in good shape, right? I only gave it out to a few people, and that's it. Changed my address. So, in a sense, when we pray to God, we change our address. We become RB Wine 1. And when that happens, so we're uplifted. And therefore prayer is to be seen as not so much a solicitation of God as it is a spiritual experience of the prayer, of the one who is praying, that by praying to God, we ennoble ourselves, and we raise ourselves to this higher degree of spirituality and of performance. On this, the great Ma'arivi Ibn Chaviv, who was the rabbi here in Yerushalayim in the 1500s, so he said that's a great idea that Rabbi Albo had, but how does he explain, what if I pray for someone else? In other words, everything that he says is true if, God forbid, the person himself is sick. And he prays, so now he's a different person and he can become well. But if he prays for a third person, for someone else, the third person may even be unaware of the fact that he's being prayed for. So then how does that, so then we are influencing God. How does that work? So on that an ingenious answer is given that also has great Jewish values. We have a rule, it says in the Torah, Hatzur Tomim Polo, God is the rock. Everything that he creates has perfection in it. Kichol Drochav Mishpat. All of his ways are justice, are just. So the rabbis say, what does it mean, all of his ways? So the example that's given is, let's say a criminal is brought before the court, a human court. The court sentences him to 40 years in jail. So that's the punishment for him. But let's say he has a child, right? So the child is now condemned to be raised without a father. Let's say he had a business, and now the business has to close, and all the employees lose their livelihood. All the ripple effect, so to speak, of throwing this rock into the water can't be helped, because human justice is unable to do all of that. But divine justice, kol drochav mishpat, everything, or the child, everything is taken into account. Has a perfection to it that extends to everything. So based on that idea, if a person prays for someone else, so the person is obviously troubled that the other person is ill. The person has pain over the other person's illness. If I become a better person in praying, so then that pain, so to speak, was for RB wine, but it wasn't for RB wine 1. And therefore it has to be removed for me, and therefore it has the ripple effect of helping the person that you prayed for. One of the most interesting phenomena that's been proven over and over again, the studies in San Francisco and in other places, is that somehow people who pray, and even people who are prayed for, medically do better than those that are absent of prayer. And it's one of the areas of mystery that surround all human endeavor. There are a lot of things that we don't really know and are not clear to us, but nevertheless, that's how it works. So we reviewed some of these ideas of prayer, and as I mentioned, these are ideas that should be used all year round. They're not restricted only to this month or to the time of the holidays, but they're things that we should contemplate and deal with all year round, and to realize that through prayer we undergo a process of self-improvement, to understand the words, to realize what we're saying and to whom we're saying it to, and that helps in our spiritual development. It raises us, it enhances us, it ennobles us, and that therefore that's why prayer is such an important part of the Jewish story. Again, one last word. The problem with prayer in the Jewish world is that we've been doing it since, many of us have been doing it since we're 3 years old. And so it becomes, my Rebbe used to say that if Yom Kippur came once in 70 years, how would we treasure it? But since it comes once a year, so we get used to it. That's true of everything. Because in life we take things for granted. So prayer requires constant renewal. You have to work at it. You have to try and make it that it shouldn't just be something of habit, but it should truly be something of inspiration and meaning to us. And like everything else in life, it has its ups and downs. Every day is different. But in general, we should always try to be on an upward curve and attempt to achieve greatness through the realization of the presence of God, that we have the ability, so to speak, to deal with Him on a regular basis and to understand the holy words that are ensconced in our prayer book, and they become better people thereby. Thanks.